So, good morning. My name is Darin Richards. I am not the pastor here. I am usually the guy that comes in a couple minutes late, makes a beeline for the coffee, and sneaks into a chair before Pastor Jeremiah notices. He notices. I am, however, a pastor's kid, actually. My dad and mom are sitting right there. My dad's a pastor of many years in North Dakota, here in Washington, and Marysville. And usually growing up in the church, I recognize as being a pastor's kid, with Pastor Jeremiah and his family being on vacation, pastors need vacations too. And it's like there's also a book out there called Preacher's Kids Are People Too. So anyway, good morning. And having grown up in the church in a youth group and camp ministry, there was always you like to play a game to break the ice. And I don't tell people much about myself. Sometimes too much vulnerability. I'm like, eh. So there's this one game called Two Truths and a Lie. I'm going to tell you 3 things about myself, 2 truths and 1 lie. Are you ready? Yeah. All right. So number 1, I have jumped on an airplane, or off of an airplane, out of an airplane. That's it. Yeah. 2, I tried out for American Ninja Warrior in Venice Beach, California. 3, I tried out for National Olympic bobsled team in Lake Placid, New York. Okay, who thinks number 1 is true? Or the lie? I'm sorry, the lie. Number 2? Number 3, the bobsled thing. Okay, actually, number 1 and 2 are true. I did jump out of a plane with my brother. It was for his birthday. That was fun. The parachute did open. I am here today. Stacy told me if the parachute didn't open, just turn your body and just fall on your instructor. And yes, I did do American Ninja Warrior when Stacy and I were dating down in Venice Beach. I only made it to the second part, and they did not air me on national television. I was probably an embarrassment. And my exit interview was not very good. I was very angry. I just wanted out of there. I was supposed to go at 11 p.m. They didn't get me to go until 4 a.m., so I was up that whole time doing that. Well, seated amongst all the other contestants, but I met an awesome guy named Michael Ira, who's a very good man, who was actually a nurse in Bellevue, and we met down there in Venice. And then, yes, actually, it was not bobsledding, it was skeleton that I did, so partially true. I went down almost 90 miles an hour down a bobsled track head first, trying to go for a national spot on an Olympic team. I did, however, do some bobsledding and help a driver out to be a brakeman, and he paid me $20 a day to pay for my track fees to be his, pretty much like you're throwing sandbags in the back of a truck to get the traction. He needed weight, so I was that weight. Crashed twice, concussion 1, and if you watch Cool Runnings, you could see how it ends up. It is a little crazy, but most people would approach a lot of these things with natural fear, just like how some people can handle a snake or a spider, and I don't want anything to do with that. So everybody has their own natural fear, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I want to go a little deeper. Fear of falling off a cliff or being nose to nose with a bear and that puts you in any natural danger is totally normal. And it's a rational fear, and then there's irrational fear, like the fear of skinny jeans or clowns. That's not irrational for me. Those things scare me, especially clowns. It's totally normal, but it keeps us alive. But one thing we don't think about here in America is the fear, and I realize that there's little children here, but the fear of being devoured by an animal. So in 1996, there's a movie that came out called The Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. The scary thing is that this was based on true events about 2 lions that were in a local village in Serengeti, Africa, that were taking over the village and taking people one by one. And they didn't know what was going on. And appropriately, they were dubbed as man-eaters or night devils because they were doing this at nighttime. So Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas, their characters were 2 prolific hunters/poachers who were world-renowned, who were asked and be paid to come in to hunt these lions to help these villagers out. Well, they kind of stepped in it. If you watch the movie, they were up against a huge challenge because as the nights went on, these lines got smarter and smarter, and they managed to confuse the villagers, disorient them, take anybody away, and it's very intense. I hid behind Stacy several times watching this movie, maybe screamed a little bit, but it is pretty crazy, and the fact that any animal that can develop a taste for that is very gross and very terrorizing. But I like to say that this parallels that the enemy of our souls is described in 1 Peter 5:8, where we say that to be alert and sober mind, your enemy the devil walks around like a roaring lion to seek whom he devours. And as this was of the human flesh that these lions were going after, we have a serious problem in the spiritual nature of the actual devil coming around, trying to separate us and divide us and devour our souls. I believe that this happens from the inside out, and it's very subtle, so much so that even people of great faith have fallen to it and are crippled by fear, especially with everything that has gone on this last year and a half. The world we live in bombards us today with the message to be afraid and to abandon our faith in Jesus. When that happens, our souls are devoured by crippling fear and anxiety. According to recent data, and this barely scratches the surface, 1 in 10 young people suffer from reported severe major depression, and 1 in 5 adults suffer reported mental health issues. And the statistics get worse every single year. And we'll go into the biology really quick of fear. And you've heard of the fight or flight. This is what happens biologically when we are afraid. Scientists now realize it's fight, flight, or freeze. This is part of the sympathetic nervous system that is biologically hardwired into us to help us avoid life or death situations, and that's something beautiful that God has created in us. But we aren't designed to live in that constantly. We do, though. We frantically are always on the go, always bombarded by bad news, always relying on coffee. Oh, I love coffee. And other things to cope with fatigue and stress. Putting it incredibly simply, we are stressing out our adrenal glands. You know the word adrenaline that when we say we're running on adrenaline, we are physically stressing out the system God made that helps us avoid unsafe situations for our own protection. In contrast, the system God designed for us to operate from is the function where we can operate with our parasympathetic nervous system. This is the state of rest and restoration. This is the state of healing from the inside out. The Word of God gives us a number of indications that God wants us to rest in this kind of reality. To trust in Him and not be afraid, to take time to meet Him and to rest, to delight ourselves in Him, and will take care of our needs. Jesus knows that we tend toward fear, not faith, and knows this is our very nature, and Satan knows that too. Jesus addressed his disciples through many storms, sometimes very literal storms. And Amy, sorry I forgot about this slide, but it is from, if you have your Bible, Mark 4:35 to 41. And we all know this story, Jesus calming the storm. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." The disciples said in this passage, and I can relate, as we all can, to this feeling, "Teacher, don't you care if we are drowning?" We tend to feel like this when we get scariest news, but instead of always fixing everything, he calms our storms. Healing from our fear takes time, and I have to say that I am in the middle of that process very well. But I'm encouraged by Jesus in this, and that he carries and cares about us through our storms. So when I was 17, April 2000, woke up in the morning to a searing pain right behind my right eye. It was a lightning pain that was shooting through the back of my head to the front of my eye. And every time I blinked or moved my eye would water bad, and I would have to actually take my, so I can see better, take my hand and kind of push on my eye to at least kind of get, kind of like a pressure relieving it a little bit. But I still managed to go to school that day. I was in third period algebra taking a quiz, and here I am, my water's going all crying, looking like I'm crying, and I think my algebra teacher, Mr. Matthews, is looking at me going, it's just a quiz, don't worry about it. But no, later on that day, my mom took me, I believe I left school, and my mom took me to Swedish, actually, in Seattle, Dr. Stephen Hamilton, and he saw that a cyst had just developed behind my optic nerve, right behind the retina. Well, as time passed, I would, to relieve the pressure, I would take an anti-inflammatory and prednisone for like a weekly trial, and then you taper off it. I work in pharmacy, so I get to show my pharmacy knowledge there. Yeah, throughout my life, or at least the next 5-6 years, once in a while it would erupt, and then I'd have to take prednisone to relieve it. On March 28th, 2006, I was sitting in my variant religious movements class at college, which is appropriate name, I guess, for the class of cults. I took a cult class. And all of a sudden, we were learning about Vernon Powell. And if you never know who that is, just Google Vernon Powell, Waco, Texas, you'll know. All of a sudden, my eye just went blind, and it was just like a shot of pain that just hit me in the back of the head. And it hurt so bad I almost snapped my binder in half. But I didn't tell anybody. The interesting thing is I had an eye appointment that day, and I actually canceled because I had class. So I called them back and said, so I'm blind, and they're like, you should come in. And so a good friend from college and my fiance at the time drove me to Swedish, and they did look through the back of my eye and saw that the cyst erupted. It started bleeding. Well, they decided to do a biopsy June 6th, 2006, and then the following week, June 14th, I found out it was melanoma cancer. My parents took me to that appointment, and I brought them in. Oh, bless you. I brought them in, and the man, Dr. Brian Sires, just flat out said, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's cancer. It's melanoma. It's in the early stages, but we'll take proper steps to see what we can do. And my mom was upset, and you could tell my dad was very upset, and the one tear down his face, and I was able to look my dad directly in the eye, and I knew my dad was there as a father to son, and I appreciated that very much, and I love you, Dad, and Mom. But what happened was, July 28th, 2006, I had my eye removed at Harborview, and then I went to the University of Washington for testing, so it's now a Husky. Hooray. I'm sure Jeremiah liked that. He was a Husky. But at the time, I was also engaged to a great gal. But what happened was, everyone around me, my family, my friends, my fiance, they were all in pain. They were hurting that something was happening to me. But I never took the time for myself to actually be vulnerable and focus on myself at the time. And I was even told, hey, you can postpone the wedding. I'm like, no, we're going to go through this and get married and stuff. Well, that was realizing now that was a bad idea. I found myself to be fearful of dying. The second time, actually, because I was born 2 months pre-me, too, and I was 10 months in the hospital as well. So this was the second time my parents had to go through a serious fear that they were going to lose their son. That and doing skeleton. My mom worried about that, too. I never focused on myself, the fear of vulnerability and the fear of dying, and I didn't want anybody else to know what I was feeling because I wanted to take care of my family and friends, but that was to my detriment. And in doing so, for the 3 years that I was married, I was not communicative. I was angry. I was hurtful. And I hurt many people. And I'm sorry. But we ended up divorcing September 9th, 2009. And it took me a long time to get back on that road. Ended up being a lukewarm Christian. Yeah, I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, but I'm not going to church. And just kind of live life. But I managed to be able to stay at a house. My friend Matt and John, Matt owned this house in South Everett, and I got to be their roommate. and just having that camaraderie and being able to be around friends, and my parents didn't live that far away, helped me realize and get myself to open up little by little. So family and friends are very supportive and mean a lot. So thank you, Matt, John, and all the friends and family that I have in my life today, and are still alive today. When I happened to lose the vision in my eye sophomore year in high school, my friend John, still friends, he decided to say it's not a tumor from Kindergarten Cop, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, when I did end up losing my eye, he goes, "Oh man, I feel really bad. It was a tumor." And I'm like, "Don't worry about it. It's not your fault, man." So, but I'm here today, still, through all the decisions I made of throwing myself down a mountain in Lake Placid, New York, and doing all these other things that worried my mom and dad half to death, but they're like, well, he's happy. Hopefully he's okay. And this, I'm still here today. But the next story really hit home, and that is a cold morning in December 2020. On a Saturday morning, I was getting up to take my daughter to see Peepa, my dad, to go eat Swedish pancakes cooked by Norwegians in Everett at Sons of Norway. And Stacy wasn't feeling well. And when she wasn't feeling well, she was already eight months pregnant with my son, and our son. And she wasn't feeling well. I'm like, this is almost the exact same way our daughter came into the world. So, yeah, I called the EMTs. They came, took her to the pavilion. I was behind, got stuck at the COVID screening at the pavilion. And he was already out when I got in there, and he was on the warming table in about 46 minutes, just like that. The interesting thing is both my daughter and my son are born at the exact same hour and minute, 9:04 a.m., which is interesting. I looked at the birth certificates. I was like, whoa. The thing we didn't know, though, was they ended up having to rush him to the NICU, and I followed after them while others were taking care of Stacy. And then 5 minutes later, there was a code blue to the NICU, and Stacy didn't know what happened, and she thought her little man was having a heart attack. What we found out was that he had a hole in his lung, his right lung. Every time he took a breath, the air would leak out into the chest cavity, and it'd become a pneumothorax, and it would suffocate him. And he also had a fractured rib on the left, which he favored very much, and being in pain, you always want to take more breath in. Well, it was crushing his chest more and more. And I just watched the nurses just get on him while other nurses broke away to take care of the code blue. And I was in fear. I was scared for my son. And this was just before Christmas. He was getting better. By December 23rd, he had a setback. We couldn't bring him home to Christmas. We spent all Christmas Day with him. While Stacy was napping in a recliner, I was holding him, listening to Christmas music, with all the wires beeping, monitors beeping, and the song "What Child Is This" came on. And I couldn't help but cry over him and pray and hope to God that he'd let me keep my son. Good news is he came home Monday, the 28th. He kind of had a little jokester that he is. He decided that's him chewing on a rib, an actual rib. All the meat is off. He's not choking. We don't know where that rib came from, but I believe the case of the neighbor's missing cat has now been solved. If we're talking about lions, his name is Leon, which means lion in French and Spanish, I believe, Leon. But he's alive and healthy, and God gave us a son. He's actually in the nursery right now, probably chewing on toys as we speak. I mean, he's got this little chomper. We call it little chomper. He's got this little one. I think that's why we gave him that. He's sharpening it. And this real quick last story. My mom had the pleasure of going to study around the world, Rome, Mexico, and then also a small town by the name of Taizé, France. And this man is by the name of Brother Friar Roger, or Brother Roger, and he was Swiss Reform. And he lived a monastic lifestyle, and actually in 1940 owned an unattended house with his sister and rescued several Christian and Jewish refugees from the Nazis. Well, he ended up getting forced into exile back to his neutral nation of Switzerland, and by 1944 he returned to this village and created a monastic movement and called Taizé. and it was an ecumenical center, and it built a church called the Church of Reconciliation for all Christians, whether you're Baptist, Catholic, Lutheran, CMA, to come together in pilgrimage to this very spot to at least find one commonality, and that is Jesus Christ as Lord. He is the male version of Mother Teresa. He was recognized by Mother Teresa and several popes. And my mom got to study and listen to him speak when she was in college, and she got to talk with the Roman Secretariat of the Vatican and Paul VI, and talked with World Council of Churches in Geneva and participated in classes with him. Well, he was a very amazing man, very gentle, very kind, and generous. I think I said generous. Did I say generous? No, generous. He is generous, and he just was, and children loved him. And they all, in the Church of Reconciliation, everyone who wanted to worship walks in to the sides, and up the middle aisle is all these brothers, men from around the world, who decided to live a monastic lifestyle and pray with him. And he was always at the top praying, and as he got older, it looked like he was sleeping sometimes, but I understand. He actually lived to be 90, and he maybe with a monastic lifestyle and probably healthy eating, he probably would still be with us today at 106. But on August 16th, 2005, about 2,500 people gathered into the Church of Reconciliation for Taizé evening prayer. And amongst that 2,500 was a 36-year-old Romanian peasant woman who decided to, while everyone was praying, jump the hedge, run past the brothers who tried to tackle her, and stabbed him. They still don't know why, but papers say that she was probably rather disturbed. I know this is a heavy story too. I mean, I've been doing some heavy stories, but there's a point to this. In that moment, after that, he was scooped up by one of the brothers, taken to a back room, and he passed away moments later. But in that moment, and being able to probably just put up an arm, as it is a human instinct to do, I don't think he had any ill will towards this woman. I believe that in that moment that he knows that he was going to die, he may have had a smile on his face and say, "I still love you." And all of us, we'd probably be really fearful when someone comes at you with a knife. Maybe you want to fight, flight, or just say, "I'm done," and freeze. But he had something greater. And this is another F word, and no, that's not an F word, but he had faith. Because as he was dying, I'd like to think that God was shining down on him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant, you glorified my name, you run the race, rest in peace, welcome home." He didn't have fear, even in front of the Nazis, in rescuing Christian and Jewish refugees, and even being forcibly exiled to Switzerland. He came back and lived what Christ called him to do, like he calls all of us. He's a good man. If you want more stories, my mom's pretty good with the stories about this guy. And actually, my mom took my dad and I to Taizé in February 2000, 2 months before the whole eye thing. And I got to see him from afar, but he looked like a very gentle and kind man. And I roomed with some German seminary students and a guy from Spain. And they were really good dudes. And a bunch of Irish kids, too, were playing soccer, so it was fun to hang out with them. So this takes to the point of him, even at the end, having that faith. Where do we go? Where is this going for us? And we live in an uncertain time in our nation and our world. We live in political volatility. We live in social unrest. We live in racial tensions. We live in the fear of the poke or fear of the unpoked. We fear of the masked or the unmasked. We fear of a pandemic. We fear of everything around us. But what does the media say? What does the doctor say? What does the actual media say? What does the neighbor yelling at you across the fence yelling at you about? That's all around us, and good to be vigilant, good to be responsible, I get that, and good to be informed. But most importantly, above all that, what matters most is, what does God say? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Isaiah 26:3, I got a lot of them, because there's a lot on fear. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Proverbs 29:25, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. The Lord is my light. Psalm 27:1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? I have one more. John 14:27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. I would like to invite the worship team back up and lead us in one more song. There's one more thing, though, as they're coming up. It's okay, you can come up, sorry. I will leave you all with this. Faith doesn't always take you out of the problem. Faith takes you through the problem. Faith doesn't always take away the pain. Faith gives you the ability to handle the pain. Faith doesn't always take you out of the storm. Faith calms you in the midst of the storm. In Matthew 28:20, in the very end, he said, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Thank you, everyone. I hope this was enlightening, and God bless.